Hi, I'm going to show you how to wrap the yarns around each other in the back of the work as you are working stranded color work with long floats to avoid getting long strands of yarn in the back of your work. So here you can see I've wrapped my yarns to avoid long floats. For me, a long float is any space of one color that's 5 or more stitches. Usually for 4 stitches I don't do a wrap, but you can decide if you want to do that or not, if you want to wrap it in there. I typically will wrap right in the center, but in this space I have the rounds were repeated where I had 5 and 1 for 3 rounds. So the first stitch I wrapped in the middle, or the first round I wrapped in the middle, the second round I wrapped 1 over, and now on this third round I'm going to wrap again on the middle stitch. I like to stagger the wraps so that nothing shows through. So this is with two-handed knitting, and I'll show you first with a Continental dominant hand. So in Continental knitting, the dominant color of the row is held in my left hand, and the background color is in my right hand for English style. So I'm knitting along, and I'm going to get to my center stitch here where I'd like to wrap my carried color across to avoid a long float. So I'm going to insert my needle into the stitch, wrap the carried color around English style, then wrap the the actual stitch color on the left hand needle, and unwrap the carried color so that the only stitch coming through is the real color, the brown stitch. And then finish those two. And then knit that. So where I would have had a very long strand of red across the back, here it's caught in the back of the sweater so that I won't get my fingers caught in there when I'm putting it on. So I'll show you that again. And again, this is Continental dominant hand. All right, so we got to the stitch that we would like to wrap the carried yarn across. So I'm going to wrap the yarn on the needle like an English knit stitch, wrap my Continental stitch, and then unwrap the carried color and pull through. And I'll do once more. Okay, so here we are. I'm at the stitch I would like to wrap. So I'm here. I'm going to wrap the yarn like this. Then wrap this one around the right hand needle, and then that one comes back around so that only the brown stitch comes through and the yarn is carried in the back. If you are an English dominant knitter and your carried yarn is held in your left hand, for example, now I've switched it, my carried yarn is in my left hand, the wrap happens a little bit differently. So I'm going to get to that center stitch again, the carried stitch. I'm going to go in, wrap the yarn behind the right hand needle. So typically with Continental knitting, we come in front and go over. For this wrap, you're going to come from behind. Then you're going to wrap the stitch English style, your regular knit stitch, and then unwrap the carried color. And of course, I'll show you again. Get to it. Here we go. All right, so here we are. I'm going into the stitch that I'd like to wrap my carried color around. I'm bringing my carried color over the back of the stitch, much like you would wrap if you're familiar with crochet, over the back of the hook. All right, so just like that, then wrap the knit stitch regularly and unwrap the carried color, and then pull just the working color through. Once more for good measure. Okay, here we are. So in, wrap the carried color over the needle, wrap the working color, and then unwrap the carried color. It seems like you're not doing much, but it's actually getting caught right there in the back of the work, so that the float that would have gone across 5 stitches has now been broken or caught in the center so that you don't have a very long strand. And I'll show you what that looks like. So right here, what would have been a float of 5 stitches worth of yarn is now broken into 2, and then the one in the center. So it's much safer to get your hands into your sweater. Happy knitting!